All right, so I think we're going to get started. I think there's still going to be some folks that join us, but we'll get started here because we've got obviously a lot to talk about today. And so as folks come in, we'll just add them and they can join as we go. So hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Maytal Kowalski, and I'm the Vice Chair of JSpace Canada. At JSpace Canada, our vision is a future of self-determination and sovereignty for Jews and Palestinians in Israel-Palestine, championed by Canadian Jews. We aim to shift the conversation around Israel-Palestine from our political institutions to our Shabbat tables. We believe that the way to do this is exactly what we are doing now, coming together, raising our voices, and finding community. Before we proceed, I would like to acknowledge that this event is taking place on the ancestral homelands of the Indigenous peoples across Canada, caretakers and stewards of this land for time immemorial, each with their own unique traditions, languages, and history. I am currently speaking to you from the traditional unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, also known as Vancouver, British Columbia. And if you'd like to share the traditional Indigenous territory from which you're joining, you are free to do so in the chat. A few really quick housekeeping notes before we jump in. As you likely noticed, we are recording the session. We share our sessions on YouTube and with our supporters. The recording only picks up on the folks that are spotlighted, which would be myself and Khalil, our speaker, and once he joins us. But if you are concerned, you of course can turn off your camera or change your name or whatever you feel comfortable with. As well, because one of our key pillars at JSpace Canada is engaging in dialogue, we endeavor to present all our speaker events as exactly that, not just a presentation, but also dialogue. We do have a lot of folks joining us today, but we do also want to hear from you and we want to hear your questions. So I'm going to moderate the discussion, but we'd love to hear your questions as well. If you'd like, you can use the raise hand icon at the bottom so that you can actually ask the question in your own voice, or you can put it in the chat and I'm happy to read it out for you. As well, we do ask that you please be respectful to our speaker today and your fellow attendees as well. We have a zero tolerance policy for racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-Palestinian racism, or any otherwise hateful language. For today, we're going to be discussing how we get from this current moment in the Israel-Hamas war to a stable and just outcome for Israelis and Palestinians. And joining us to talk more about that is political analyst and co-founder of the Agora Initiative, Khalil Sayegh. And Khalil, I'm going to add a spotlight so that you can join us. There you are. A real quick bio of Khalil. Khalil is a seasoned political analyst focusing on the intricate dynamics of the Middle East and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Born and raised in Gaza, Palestine, and having lived in Ramallah and Bethlehem before moving to Washington, D.C., Khalil has used his unique lived experience to foster positive change in the region and advocate for a just and peaceful Middle East. Khalil was a peace activist working with different organizations to foster a grassroots movement of understanding nonviolence and transformation among Israelis and Palestinians when living in Ramallah. Believing that the voices of the people shape the destiny of the nations, Khalil also co-founded the Agora Initiative with Israeli academic Eliezer Weiss. This innovative new organization seeks to advocate constitutional democracy in the Middle East. I would love to hear more about that when we get to those questions. Khalil holds a master's degree in comparative politics from American University in Washington, D.C., where his research focused on democratization in the Middle East. And he is pursuing an additional master's degree in human rights at the Catholic University of America. A true catalyst for change, Khalil's educational, professional, and lived experience has provided him the unique ability to bridge divides, facilitate understanding, and work tirelessly in pursuit of a better, more equitable future in Israel, Palestine, and the broader Middle East. Khalil, with that, welcome, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Mital, for having me.
Great to have you. We do obviously want to talk about this current moment. It's what's on everybody's mind. But I just want to set a little bit of the context. Obviously, from your bio, we hear you were born and raised in Gaza. You lived in the occupied West Bank. So you spent actually the majority of your life abroad, not in the diaspora. That background, oftentimes for Israelis and Palestinians, we don't often have a time to have the opportunities to interact by design, to interact and meet one another. And yet, even before you came to the US, that was something that you were doing. You were involved in a lot of different peace organizations and shared society work. And I'm just curious, what first prompted you to want to do that? And how did you first even start making those connections from Gaza and from the occupied West Bank?
Sure, yeah, that's a good question. growing up in Gaza, I never had an interaction with Israelis or even a Jewish person. And I always explain to people that the constructed view of the other or the constructed view of an Israeli or a Jewish person for someone who grew up in Gaza is shaped by their experiences, what they lived, and their actual experiences that they had. And the only experience I had in Gaza with the Israelis was the Air Force, when the Israeli forces would bomb Gaza. And I remember being 6 years old when the first bombing during the second intifada happened. And that was my view of the Israelis. So it was constructed and shaped by the fact that they're after us. They're trying to kill us because of what's happening in Gaza. And also because of the history, because 70% of the Gaza Strip are families that have descended from refugees in 1948, including my families who were forced to leave their homes. So these are the views that are constructed about the other, and by the nature of the segregation, you don't really get to meet the others. Now, after I moved to the West Bank, 2009, I started thinking more about the other, because for the first time I was forced to see Israeli civilians on the streets, and I had to struggle with seeing the other as humans who just look like me, act like me, they feed their kids and care about their kids just like my parents cared for me. And that led me to a long journey where I found myself talking to Israelis, attending these sort of activism, church society, whatever they call it. And through that, I found myself wanting to bring more and more Palestinians to understand the other and to find ways through which we can find a political solution. However, I realized that it's not enough to talk only about talking to each other or share society, because we're not equal in any measure in the West Bank, right? One is living under occupation and the other people are part of the occupying force. And that also led me to think more that we don't need to only talk to each other, although that's very important. We need to act together in a political manner to bring about a just and lasting solution that I happen to believe it should be a two-state solution.
Spoiler alert for the next questions. So that actually does lead us really well into that next question, which is that, the moment that we're in right now, obviously, the Hamas attacks on October 7th in Israel, which took the country by surprise and were horrific. And we still see an entire society just reeling from those moments. And there are still hostages being held in Gaza. At the same time, the death toll in Gaza is rising every day. It's at numbers that are so incredibly difficult to imagine, and obviously I'll take that opportunity as well to say that we're all hoping for the safety, security, and eventual peace of your family that's there as well. This humanitarian crisis that's there is getting more dire day by day, but with all of that and all of this destruction and all of the devastation that is happening, there is obviously going to be a day after. Currently, I think the estimates are like the next 4 to 6 weeks is when this intense fighting is going to end. And what we've been focused on at JSpace a lot is like, how do we utilize that day after moment to make sure that this never happens again and that we have a just and equitable peace? That we realize we have to break out of this status quo or this conflict management. And I'm just curious for you. I mean, you just mentioned the two-state solution, so I think that's probably what you want the day after to look like. I'm wondering if you want to talk to us a little bit more about why you think that that's the right answer, as well the obstacles to get there, and what leaders and society on either side, on all sides, have to do to get us to that place.
Sure, Mital. I mean, to start with, I would just say that it is really very hard for Palestinians and for the Arab world in general to be thinking of the day after, because as they're watching the people in Gaza being slaughtered, a lot of civilian casualties are happening. Families are being starved, including my families. People who need medical attention cannot access medical attention. People are literally dying of medical neglection in Gaza. So to talk about the day after is quite hard for people, and I get it, and emotionally it's draining. But at the same time, we have to be practical, right? We have to look for something to hope for, and we have to look for a way out of that. I happen to believe it should lead us to some sort of two-state solution, that this is something that both people can enjoy a certain level of rights, security, and national identity can be fulfilled. However, there are a lot of obstacles on the way to lead toward a two-state solution, right? We are talking about October 7 and the trauma, this horrific attack that happened, the trauma that goes to the Israelis cannot be underlined. And the trauma is the way through which Israel is conducting its military war or operation in Gaza is also traumatizing a generation of Palestinians that will be hard to heal from all of these. But even prior October 7th, the situation seemed impossible. The two-state solution were impossible. It seemed impossible. Different bills and laws were passed on the Israeli side to more or less annex the West Bank. I mean, we are saying the annexation didn't really happen, but more or less it did happen. I mean, Smotrich, who is the Minister of Finance, is in charge of the West Bank. So these are obstacles. The other obstacle, obviously, is that on the Israeli side, there is no willingness to negotiate two-state solution, but not only no willingness, they just say it out loud. We don't want two-state solution, and we don't want the Palestinian Authority to go back to Gaza. On the Palestinian side, we have two main obstacles. The first is that Hamas presents itself and Hamas's radicalization among a certain segment of the Palestinian society who can play as a spoiler at any time. On the other hand, we have a very weak national movement, that is Fatah and the Palestinian Authority. And I distinguish between Fatah and the Palestinian Authority because it's analytically different. Fatah as a political party, as a movement, has been becoming weaker and weaker and less institutionalized than it used to be. On the other hand, also the Palestinian Authority is quite weak as well as a government, as a governing body. So these are the problems of leading toward two-state solution. Now, this is sort of, it might seem like a long-term thinking, right? We're talking about two-state solution, but the short-term thinking is what do we do with Gaza? There's a humanitarian crisis that has to be addressed today. I do believe that the only way to address the humanitarian crisis is a ceasefire right now, to reevaluate the way through which this operation is happening. Let's even assume like war cannot really end, but at least we need a ceasefire to reevaluate how can we minimize casualties, how can we have I've been calling for a international humanitarian space in Gaza because the truth is all the spaces that Israel claimed are safe in Gaza were not safe and people are being slaughtered there. So we cannot trust as it stands today the Israeli army to conduct a safe space of any form for the people in Gaza. But the day after, I think we need a responsible authority in Gaza. And I think the Palestinian Authority should and can play the most vital role there. But there are so many obstacles to the Palestinian Authority coming there. Not only that they are weak, that to an extent they need some level of legitimacy from the Palestinians that only can come if the Palestinian Authority have at least some form of starting process of negotiation with the Israelis. Again, I'd like to remind everyone that the Palestinian Authority was founded as a transitional government. So the goal, we were never aspiring as Palestinians to have a Palestinian Authority. We're aspiring to a state, and the Oslo Agreement states that for 5 years we'll have the Palestinian Authority as a transition power. This never happened. It never led us to two states. And that's the very core problem of any lack of legitimacy, of weakness of the Palestinian Authority, is that two states were not fulfilled in the 5 years of Oslo. Obviously, there is corruption and all sort of other cases, but I think that is the major issue. I hope I answered the question. I felt like I sort of went all over the place with my answer.
No, it was really good. And I actually think that it leads nicely to another question that I think I want to dig into a little deeper with what you said. We at JSpace Canada also obviously promote a two-state solution. The pushback that we most often hear, and I think it's likely the same I'm going to assume it's the same for you, is like, neither society wants that. The people don't want a two-state solution. How can we get there? I know that I've heard you speak in other places as well about kind of how polling on that issue has changed in both societies. And I'm wondering if you could talk to us about that a little bit more. Is it true that that the societies on the ground don't want that? Is it true that has always been the case? How has that kind of evolved? You brought up Oslo, so I'm curious, Oslo, there's obviously a lot of support for the two-state solution. What happened and where do we see ourselves today?
Sure, yeah, no, this is a very good question. Now, historically, the way the Palestinian public opinion have worked, and to an extent, the Israeli public opinion is similar. I always see them as a mirror image, actually. that the Palestinian support for two-state solution was always higher. It was like 65%. There was always those radical, or not radical, I mean radical in the sense of that they believe in radical ideas, such as like complete regime change in Israel, right? That don't believe in two-state solution. They believe in some form of one state. But usually it's at 65%. It can go up to 70% during the times of an actual negotiation, like around the Olmert Abbas, we've seen like increase in the support. And then when more and more settlements are built and the Israeli government is unwilling to give any concessions, also the Palestinians start believing less and less in two-state solution. Like the last, it was like at 35% or something, right? Interestingly enough, it was higher in Gaza, slightly higher than in the West Bank. Like it was like, I think 40 something in Gaza. In the West Bank, it was much, much lower, like in the 30s. But things can change really quickly as a political process is starting in this process. Now, when we say that there is no support for two-state solution, or there is support for two-state solution on the public opinion, like when we say there is no, I mean, what is the alternative we're talking about? Usually it's a one-state solution, right? One democratic solution or whatever. What is really interesting is that even when there is no support for two-state solution on the Palestinian side, there is no really significant support for one-state solution either, which tells you something about the psychology, political psychology and political culture, which is the decrease of belief in two-state solution usually is a decrease of belief in any solution, meaning that people become just so nihilistic. And it's the same on the Israeli side, by the way. Like when people don't believe in two-state solution, it's not always an increase in support of like one Jewish state that is from the river to the sea, which obviously would be an apartheid state. It's not like this is increased. Usually it's like, okay, let's try this shrinking the conflict thing, right? Or let's try this managing the conflict thing. You never see, or just there is no solution. We're going to stay like this, very, very nihilistic, right? And that's the Palestinian attitude in that. So my answer to people who believe two-state solution is not possible because of the public opinion, that this can change and it's easy to change. Now, the bigger challenge that we have are the challenges that I mentioned before. There are settlements that are being expanding that makes the geographic continuity of Palestinian state impossible. There are radicals actors in Israel who don't want two-state solution. We have a radical movement such as Hamas who have monopoly over power in Gaza. That's an issue. We can't get to two-state solution with that. These are real challenges that need to be addressed. But the public opinion piece of it, or that people don't want it, I don't think is the most genuine one. The Palestinian people have made a painful compromise to accept two-state solution, because to us, again, that's a compromise. It's 22% of our historical homeland, and we accepted that. And to many nationalist Palestinians, to accept one-state solution, even more painful compromise, because you don't have to have your national sort of feeling and identity represented. I don't have this problem because I'm not as nationalist. I tend to be more liberal, so I would live in any state. But I know that majority of my friends and family want the flag, want the national anthem, etc. And that's something that I think we have to be sensitive to as well. That's why I still support two-state solution. But I'm open-minded. You know, if things change and tomorrow millions of Palestinians and Israelis start calling for one-state solution, I consider it. But I don't think this is likely in the next few decades at least.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, because you touched on, so I don't know if you'll have the answer to this, but what you said actually I found really interesting, that support for the two-state solution at the last polling was actually a little bit higher in Gaza. And I want to ask you if you have any theories or hypotheses as to why that is, and also if you can use that to kind of talk about, you know, I think that what you've talked about a lot in terms of the obstacles of the two-state solution is very relevant in terms of settlement expansion in the West Bank, and annexation, de facto or de jure annexation, what we see now under Smotrich, which you've talked about. But obviously Hamas, you know, we kind of look at those things as obstacles, and I agree that they are, but Hamas is also a pretty big obstacle. So I'm wondering if you could talk about sentiment specifically in Gaza and Hamas specifically in Gaza, and how that presents either some obstacles or opportunities when we talk about a two-state.
Sure, yeah. So to start with, why the support is higher in Gaza, I mean, I've been thinking of this. I don't have like a a definite answer on that, but I can give you my guess. And my guess is that there is a sense in Gaza since 2006 in which there is some form of a sovereignty or a state inside Gaza, at least despite the siege and the blockade and all of that. And that all what we need to do is just take a one step more toward like opening the borders and liberation. There is a sense in which that two states could work if there is something that happened. So that's an hypothesis that no one tested. I don't know if that's the answer. Another hypothesis I can come with is that people in Gaza are really tired of war, and the two-state solution has become almost an equivalency to saying I believe in peace, because any other form of saying, oh, I believe in peace, but I reject the two-state solution because the other solution is not as practical. And that might sound funny to some of my friends on the left because they tend to believe that the two-state solution is the less practical. But guess what? It's much more practical than talking about a one-state solution. And people see the suffering they're going through. They see the repression of Hamas. They see the Israeli war crimes. And they say, we don't want to live under that. Why do we want to have to go on a war after war? So that's, I think, explains what's happening. In the West Bank, you see the settlements expanding around you, and you lose hope of two-state solution. You see the settlers attacking you every day, the pogrom in Hawara, etc. On Hamas and their lack of support for two-state solution, to be honest, we don't really need Hamas's support for two-state solution for it to be fulfilled. We need the support of some of Hamas's sympathizers or Hamas's supporters. And those are interesting groups. I actually did some analysis on the public opinion of those who voted for Hamas in 2006. And interestingly, I found that 62% of those who voted for Hamas believe that Hamas's government should negotiate two-state solution. So at that time, even 62%. Now, obviously, in election, it's different because in election, there is more, it's not only Hamas members, right? It's like, a lot of people, most of the people who voted for Hamas were more secular. They weren't like religious and committed to Hamas itself. So the election is not the most best prediction of that. And then you have to think of like among Hamas's members, the people who support Hamas, how many of them would be supportive of two-state solution? I really don't know. I don't know the answer to that. What I can say that I know, for example, that, I was getting to something else. I shouldn't say that. But I know that I don't know a lot about within Hamas's members' public opinion because there's not a lot of data and research done on that. I tried to do something about it, but it wasn't the most accurate. So I probably shouldn't.
It's really interesting. Thank you. I do have a couple more questions that I've prepared, but there are some questions that kind of, I think, go directly to what we're talking about in the chat. So I'm going to ask you, some of those. Actually, I think I'm going to see if we can creatively combine these two questions, because there's one question about whether the founders of Israel envisioned a two-state solution. I don't know if you know the answer to that, but I'll put it out there. And then the next question is that someone is saying that the current Israeli government is largely seen as discredited by their failure to prevent the October 7th attacks and a lot of other reasons before that. And there's a lot of public opinion saying that this government is going to collapse and Netanyahu is going to be gone. So how do we even talk about the day after when no one really knows what the Israeli government is going to look like when the active hostilities end? So you've got a question about way at the beginning of the state, and you've got a question about the future of the state, both about Israel specifically, but to the best of your ability, if you can answer those.
Well, I'm not a historian, so I don't know what the founding fathers of Israel thought. I have general sense from history books that I've read. There seem to be conflicting opinions, right? On the one hand, Ben-Gurion said that I would take an Israel even the size of a tablecloth, right? On the one hand, but on the other hand, he said, but don't worry, because we got to expand, right? We can just conquer more land, we accept a small piece, and then we expand. So there is that conflict there. And then on the other hand, there's this notion of iron wall, right? That Jabotinsky spoke about. And Jabotinsky was an interesting figure, very realistic. And his idea of an iron wall was that we got to build the wall, but then we have to make peace with the Palestinians. Now, what does this mean? Does it mean a two-state solution, whatever? But at least they all had a sense of which at some point we gotta do, we're gonna have peace with the Palestinians. Now, Netanyahu has taken the Jabotinsky metaphor a little bit farther, where we build the wall, but we never make peace with them. He didn't like get really, he's not a very good disciple of Jabotinsky, as many of my historian friends would tell me. So that's my sense of what the Israelis thought. I really don't know if they really had a genuine support for two states solution or not. What's the other question? It was
in terms of thinking about the day after, when the Israeli government is so unstable, and so I would add, I guess, also like so just utterly hated, honestly, by the Israeli public.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a similar disclaimer at the beginning. I'm not an expert on Israeli politics. My expertise on the Palestinian side, but I think that any Israeli government that will come after, I don't see them being, I mean, they'll be different in the settlement policies a little bit. It wouldn't be as theocratic and fanatic, etc. But on the like end question, I think all of them fall within the managing the conflict, dealing with it, whatever. I think that the only way to get to a two-state solution, if we really want to get there, or to like, at least if not to get there, to at least put Gaza and the West Bank on the trajectory of going back toward there, I think it has to be from a lot of international pressure. And this, I mean, like specifically the US administration has to put a lot of pressure. Obviously, it's hard to know that too, because Mr. Trump might be coming, and we don't know what his opinion on these things. And on the other hand, I think what matters a lot too are the Arab countries, how the Arab countries going to conduct themselves. Would Saudi Arabia go to a normalization deal with Israel despite the Palestinian state, or whatever, how they're going to act, etc. And on the Arab side, I would say that there is a sense in which the Arab states have realized after October 7 that this can't continue, that we can't have another deal of normalization without two-state solution, because this is going to keep blowing up in our faces, and it's bad. Especially it's bad for countries like Egypt and Jordan, who have a genuine fear of an actual revolution that would throw the people in power out if something happens in Palestine again. So that's I think if there is enough pressure from the Arabs on Israel, and there is enough pressure from the Americans, and at the same time Hamas is not in the picture, or at least it's co-opted, or it's part of the PAA, or Palestinian Liberation Organization, they disarm, they give up their military wing, there is hope. But as we've known, it's complicated, and there are so many variables that can change and something go bad.
Yeah. The in the international community, that wrench of a potential Trump victory in 2024 could change a lot of things. That will affect on the ground in Israel-Palestine, that will be happening more closer to our geographical region. So that's something to think about as well. So I asked you a question about the founding. I asked you a question about the future. I've got a question that's like right in the middle there that I want to ask, which is that someone is curious about how do you answer to the claims that there could be two states today had the Palestinian Authority accepted the two peace agreements proposed in the early 2000s?
Sure, could have been. Do we know all the details of what these proposals were? Do we know if Ehud Barak, who was out of office a few months after the agreement got carried out, do we know that Bibi Netanyahu would have carried out through these agreements? All these are like very hypothetical questions that we could ask, and I could go on all long answering you from 1947 and all this, idea of Palestinians keep turning down, to explain to you how none of these opportunities were genuine opportunities. Because again, we're not asking for pity or mercy. We are asking for our fundamental rights, and we are negotiating to get these fundamental rights. So any deal that is not like rejected, but like say, oh, well, this is unfair, we can't really accept that, we want this and that, is I could argue all of that, but I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in looking forward and saying, what can we do right now to get something out of it? Generally, there is consensus among people who study this subject, is that the actual deal that were proposed to the Palestinians that was good enough to be taken wasn't Ehud Barak. He wasn't really serious, nor was the Clinton administration. They were very biased. It was the Olmert deal in 2000. Was it 2007, 2008? That was the real deal, but also the problem was that Ehud Olmert, sorry, was unable to stay in power for so long. So the notion was at the beginning that Abbas has rejected the deal. But then Ehud Olmert came on TV and said that no, actually Abbas didn't reject it. He just didn't have time to study it and agree before I had to be out of office and go to jail. These are the problems. So we could have been a two-state solution. They were not. Who to blame is a different. We could play this game, but I'm more interested in where to move from now, and who to play right now is important. Which is, as I said, it's the Israeli government and Hamas and other radical groups as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's an interesting point there, which is I think that a lot of the perception or maybe misconception is that, because those deals didn't come to fruition, we've had this kind of status quo and we hear about managing the conflict or shrinking the conflict. But I think that, and I mean, you can answer this better than me, obviously, but I think that for those on the Palestinian side, the idea that there's been any sort of status quo or that anything has been managed is just so wildly inaccurate, because we've seen that things have gotten worse. And it's one thing to say, I agree with what you're saying, that like it's one thing to say yes, it could have happened, and I think that's probably true. We could be there right now, but what we definitely know is that where we're at now hasn't been just like any sort of stasis or any sort of kind of thing that feels that it could be. It feels like it could be managed from the Israeli side, but likely not from the Palestinian side. I also wanted to ask, so as we're talking about kind of two states and different moments in history and things that have happened, things that have not happened, there is, it's actually interesting. I heard on a podcast recently, someone said that like the left, especially in Israel, is the side that's for the two-state solution and has been kind of from the beginning, which is kind of an inverse of what you usually see of progressivism, which is that, usually there's new ideas and there's more ideas. And here's a situation where you actually have the progressive side that's been stuck in a two-state solution idea from the beginning of the state, really, and since kind of different leftist groups have come on the scene, especially as more right-wing governments have taken over. So thinking about, and this is a question in the chat as well that I think a lot of people are curious about, because a lot of folks in the international left are kind of trying to move through that and see a more progressive option or see a more updated option. And there's a lot of talk about a confederated model. There's different types of confederation. I know there's different organizations that have different ideas as to what that would look like. But I'm curious, do you see that as kind of a potential, not a one state or a two state, but a potential? I think that definitely in the international community, there's a lot that people really like about it, because it really speaks to our values of, equity and cross-border cooperation and all these different things. So I'm curious if you see that as maybe an alternative to this kind of binary one state or two state.
I mean, what I would say is it sounds very good and attractive in theory, but when you get to the details, it's very problematic. I mean, the first thing that one has to understand is that the very definition of confederation, it presupposes two states, right? I mean, so in order to make confederacy between two entities, both have to be recognized states. Now, the thing about these calls is, on the one hand, you support this sort of inspirational for a confederation, but on the other hand, you are unwilling to support two-state solution, which is the very first step toward confederation. Now, my understanding, at least of the literature and policy memos I read from the Israeli side on what they mean by confederation, is that there is no, like, you don't transit to two-state solution and then you build confederation. It's just all of a sudden, somehow we're going to generate confederation. I don't know what that means. How does this address the settlements? Like, the settlers get to stay there, and we're gonna imagine somehow that these most fanatic group of Israelis in the West Bank somehow going to accept Palestinian sovereignty, somehow going to live in equality, segregation system will end it, but at the same time, there is completely open borders. I don't buy it. I mean, there could be a world in which we establish two-state solution right now, and 10 years from now, we realize that we sort of like each other so much that we want to be in some sort of, like, connection geographically, etc. Why no? Now, I don't think either that a two-state solution should be completely separated in the sense of like you can't go drive back and forth, right? I think it most likely two-state solution should look more the relationship with time. It would hopefully evolve to a friendship that is similar between Canada and the US. I hope so. And if not, then we'll have to work hard to make it this way because geographically it makes more sense, or even economically, to be connected in that sense. But also on confederation, we have a tremendous inequality between both sides that I'm afraid cannot be addressed in a confederation. Two-state solution is not the perfect way of addressing it either, but it's at least a little bit better. It gives more freedom to the Palestinians. So there's all these challenges out there. If we really aspire to confederation, it's not a bad thing. It's not, but you gotta get to two-state solution first and then talk about it. I don't see a world in which you jump between both. I mean, federalism is a whole different thing, right? I mean, I see how you would argue for federalism in that sense because it would make more sense. But confederation, it's a little bit harder, I think.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Thank you. I think that there's a lot of curiosity around that model, and it's really good to hear your view of it, and kind of what we would have to do to make that happen. Another question in the chat about kind of the future and a potential two-state solution moving forward is, do you have a vision of how Palestinian democracy would work? And the question is being asked because some of us think that the proportionate representation system of Israel is dismal in that it encourages extremists to gain a few seats, and to hold power over a prime minister as exists now, with some evil ministers who control Netanyahu to some degree. I think that's a pretty fair assessment. With that in mind, what would your vision look like for Palestinian democracy?
I obviously don't have model in the sense of whether it would be like, based on, prime minister or presidential or whatever. I don't have a regime type in hand there. I mean, we have some sort of institutions that has to be more implemented where we have to an extent we could have a working system between parliament and president, etc. But what I have is the very principles I believe in, which is, liberal democracy, or I mean, we call it constitutional democracy at the Agora Initiative because the word liberal is very triggering for a lot of people in the Middle East. We do believe in that. We believe in equal rights. We believe in, votes, etc., parliament and presidential. But all these details can be figured as we are talking and thinking about that more. The Palestinian politics as it stands today, we have only two major parties that can actually, run a government. There's Fatah and Hamas. We've got another small parties. There is room maybe for coalitions between Fatah and other groups on like the liberals and what they call like independence, etc. But that's where it stands, and like sort of in a way, it's like a two big political parties, right? They're going to compete now. I see. I mean, when a state is established, I think that these parties will sort of be, because they're not only parties, they're factions, right? I mean, they will have to evolve, and it will be interesting to see their natural evolution from an anti-colonial struggle movement to what will become most likely, I would see it as nationalist camp of party and more conservative camp, which is more national secular and conservative, which is Hamas. Even if Hamas doesn't survive, but the constituency of Hamas will survive, and they're part of our people. We can't just get rid of them or send them in.
Mm-hmm. So that's actually, there's another question in the chat that I think that goes really well too, which is someone's asking for you to share your idea or vision of what a two-state solution would actually look like. So like land, like from a geographical land perspective, we obviously have the issue of the settlements. You brought that up already, as well as like economic and political. How does a Palestinian state become self-reliant? And I actually want to add to that question because we haven't talked about it yet. When we talk about different parties, we haven't talked about different leaders. Abbas, obviously aging, does not have a lot of support within Palestinian civil society. So when you think about kind of that vision, I'd love to hear a little bit more from you for sure about like what it looks like geographically, what we do about the settlements, what we do about the disparities in economy, but also the future of Palestinian leadership vis-a-vis the individuals as opposed to the parties.
Yeah, I mean, first geography. I mean, to us and to the international community, including all the Arab states, the boundaries or the borders are already there. 67 border is the start of the negotiation. Now, where Palestinians are not rigid in the sense that they said we can accept transfer of territories here and there, or not transfer, swap of territories here and there in equal size and value, etc. This is something on the table we can talk about, but like the starting talking point is 67 border. Israel has to recognize that its occupation is illegal. I mean, there is no way around it. You're going to like go left and right on it. It's illegal. It will never be legal in the eyes of the people until the Palestinians make certain concessions and part of the 67 border. I don't know what that looks like. My preference, and that's not very popular opinion these days, is that Jerusalem, since this is the most heated most heated area, right, of this 67 border, should be an international city. That's my belief. I don't see a way in which an Israeli government or a Palestinian government can be just for all the religious minorities there, and also obviously the Muslim and Jewish majority who are in the city. So I do think an international body that can include Israelis and Palestinians should be in charge of Jerusalem. How they become self-reliance economically? I mean, look at the West Bank today. Despite all its like they have a lot of dependency on Israel, but they're very innovative people. I mean, Palestine is the most educated country in the Arab world, by the way. Gaza itself, 97% rate of education. The people that have higher education are people. We have 200,000 Palestinians working in really high positions in UAE, in Kuwait, and other places. So we don't really need anyone to babysit us. We know how to take care of ourselves economically. Just the area C that is controlled by Israel yearly cost the Palestinians loss of 10 billion of their GDP from resources and other things that could be done there. So we can rely on ourselves. We can take care of ourselves. Obviously, an open border would mean a lot. The lack of checkpoints would mean a lot. Today, to open a regular business in Palestine, there are studies that have been done where they showed more than 500 hours a year is lost of someone's business just at the checkpoints. They literally lose things. Tremendous amount of money are being lost just as we transfer food or issues like that between, let's say, Bethlehem and Ramallah, and then the checkpoint gets to shut for a few hours and things go bad. All these obstacles that are literally killing our economy because of the occupation will be gone, and I think that the Palestinians can have a flourishing economy.
Awesome, thank you. What about, so there's another question as well, still talking about, oh, you didn't answer the last part of my question. I'm not gonna let you off the hook. I'm gonna tie it into the next question. So someone's asking about potential of an international consortium to be an interim authority, because neither the Israelis nor the PA has adequate public confidence, and neither had the goal of 2 states. So what you think about an international consortium? And the last part of my question, and this might feed into this as well, was specific Palestinian leaders. So like Barghouti or Sayed or something like that.
Barghouti, who said Sayegh? Is it me or?
Or no, Salam Sayed.
Yeah. So on the international thing, it's like to control all of Palestine, you mean, for a transitional period, or like just on the border, or like what? The international versus.
Barb, do you want to clarify your question? You can unmute yourself if you want to ask the question, or you could just write it in the chat. If you want to talk. There you are. Hi, Barb.
Hi.
Hey.
How are you? This is wonderful. I love it. Thank you. You're brilliant, both of you. Okay, what I'm thinking about is that political parties on all sides lack credibility, and they lack a commitment to a peaceful outcome. And so I'm wondering about some kind of, while there are elections and while there are perhaps conditions set up for people who run for leadership office, unlike Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, they would be on the outside. I'm wondering whether some kind of international management process would be good, for sure for Gaza, but I'm thinking also perhaps for the PA and also for Israel, while there is a search for some kind of process that really takes advantage of this terrible tragedy and turns it into the possibility of actually making a change that's been way overdue.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. When it comes to the Palestinian side, there has been acceptance on the Palestinian Authority side for an international forces to be placed in the West Bank and in Gaza as well, in a context of two-state solution for to lead for some sort of peace. But also they were supportive of even like deploying international forces today in the West Bank to protect people from settlers' violence. Again, even during the war in Gaza, the increase in attacks by fanatic settlers against Palestinians is tremendous. It's something that we can look lightly into. So these are ideas that have been discussed. Now, when it comes to Gaza, Hamas has refused completely any presence of international forces. The Arab states, which I know that they do things in coordination with the Palestinian Authority, have said we are open to it, but we are only open to it in context of like reaching a final state solution, which is a two-state solution. In the words of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Jordan, he said in DC, he was in DC this week, and he said it, he repeated it many times. He said, we are not willing for Israel all the time to just create a mess, gets in, destroy infrastructure, cost like $50 billion or whatever, and then they tell us, oh, come clean our mess, come and govern this city that is no longer livable. That's not something that the Arabs are willing to do. So this can be something only in light of a two-state solution. The international community, especially the Arabs, would be willing to jump and to make things more stable. On the Israeli side, obviously, there's like to govern, for the international community to govern inside Israel or to have any oversight. That's no for Israelis, from what I know, right? They're very nationalist and sensitive about these issues, and also they have functioning institutions, more or less, right? So Palestinians would be okay with like a transitional period of international forces in Gaza, would be okay with international forces to be on the border indefinitely in a two-state solution, to something that Abbas proposed in 2012, I think, where he said, I'm even willing to have the NATO on our border to ensure Palestinian security and Israeli security as well.
Awesome, thank you. Thinking about the goals, so we've got about 10 minutes. There's a lot of really awesome questions in the chat. There's a few more that I want to get to. So I'm going to try to get to everybody's. If I don't, my apologies. There's a question about, right now, the stated goal of this war for Israel, at least, and I think for, its allies, definitely the US, is getting rid of Hamas. But you've already alluded to, and I think folks kind of know as well, like Hamas is also the governing body in Gaza right now, and it's the government that was elected. I mean, they haven't had elections since they were elected in the early 2000s, but it is a government that was elected. So when we talk about like getting rid of Hamas, which is the goal of this war, what does that actually look like? Is that possible, and how does that happen?
Yeah, I mean, these are good questions to ask an Israeli official too, right? Like, what does it mean? I mean, I've been like, I was on TV with an Israeli official, and I asked him, like, what do you mean but like destroying Hamas? And it all like nonsense rambling, nothing like really concrete about what does this mean. And what I said basically is that if you're talking about the ending of the capabilities of Hamas to govern, this has already happened, at least in the north, and then in the south, it's happening. If you're talking about the end of military the military capabilities of Hamas in Gaza completely, it would take much longer time than that. Because as we've seen, even right now, Hamas is still capable of firing rockets on Israel. But not only that, what I heard too, that is Hamas is still capable of producing missiles underground in the tunnels. And I don't know how Israel is going to deal with this challenge as well. So Israel has to ultimately decide what does it mean by eliminate. They actually don't use only destroying Hamas, but the word eliminating Hamas, which I don't know what that means. Like, do you want to go after every Hamas voter or supporter and kill him or her? Or do you want to like jail everyone from them? In which case would be an insane scenario that they cannot fulfill, actually, that they cannot do. If you mean destroying of the government, deal done. If you mean destroying militarily, what's the end? Like where would it end? And as long as the Israeli army will be present in Gaza, Hamas will keep fighting. But not only this, I mean, most likely you will have new movements that will emerge to fight against the Israelis there. But if you mean to just weaken their military, I think this already happened to an extent, right? Also, the other challenge is that like Hamas could be destroyed as a government body in Gaza. That's quite likely, and survive as an insurgency group, just like the post invasion of Taliban. Taliban was destroyed as a government, and the U.S. managed to bring about more secular government there, and Taliban survived as insurgency groups, and the rest is history. We know they took over Taliban again, Taliban, Afghanistan again. So these are challenges that the Israelis have to think of. And unless they have a plan that includes a legitimate party to take care of Gaza the day after, Hamas is not going anywhere. You could think and say, oh, well, Hamas will fight against Palestinian Authority again, or the Arabs. Yes, that's likely, but they would have no legitimacy or support to do that. They will be very much like the people will be against them, and they can't, like, survive with the people being against them completely. Unlike in the case of Israel staying there, people would support them in the future.
We've got a couple minutes left. I do want to ask, we spent a lot of time, we might be able to get to let's see, we might be able to do 2 more questions yet. But we spent a lot of time talking about the situation on the ground in Israel, in Gaza. Obviously, there's a large group of folks here today who are all in the diaspora because this matters to us a lot. Folks who are connected to Israel, folks who are connected to Palestine, folks who feel connected to both and want to see a better outcome. And so when we're talking about the influence that we can have as everyday, people who support what is, who support a peaceful outcome and want to see something different for the region. The question we always get asked is like, what can we do to help? But I want to put a little bit of a kind of finer point or a little bit of a twist on it, because I think that you have a really unique perspective because you have spent the vast majority of your life in the region as opposed to in the diaspora. When you look at how the West is mobilizing, either pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, kind of picking their sides and doing activism based on those sides that they've picked. What do you think it is for all sides, for any sides? What do you think we get wrong in the West? And where do you think we could be more effective with our activism and with our passion for the issue?
Sure, yeah, that's a good question. I actually, when I first came to the US and I encountered the conversation, or as I call it, actually the war over the war. There's a little war going on, right, over what's happening about the war there. I was really shocked, not shocked that people have strong opinions, not shocked that people have emotions. All these issues are legitimate things to have. But I was shocked that people have completely forsaken civility and completely forsaken that we can disagree and completely even protest against each other, but be civil in a sense and still respect each other in a human level. Something that is normally missing in like areas of conflict in the Middle East, and understandably, and that's normal. It's part of human nature, right? When you get tribal and there is war. But it's not normal for me that the diaspora is falling to that. It's not normal for me that a Palestinian activist here, or not, even worse, actually, sometimes pro-Palestine active or pro-Israel active, who's not even Palestinian or Israelis, unwilling to talk to the other, unwilling to consider their point of view. That's, I think, is one thing that I always tell my friends in the diaspora here. Yes, there is emotions, there's all that, but at the end of the day, people who disagree with you, they're your neighbors. Usually, they're your fellow countrymen. You gotta find way to have a civil conversation and have way to disagree and even protest against each other, but peacefully and in a way that doesn't antagonize the other in this regard. Now, and with that, I would say the two things I think the diaspora can be influential in is, on the one hand, continue this conversation with the other diaspora group, like the pro-Israel diaspora have to continue conversation, or if there is not continue, maybe start a conversation with the pro-Palestine group, and vice versa, on one hand. On the other hand, you have to push for a political solution. We cannot just, talk about, peace and love, and let's talk to each other. We are all the same, whatever. While there is an actual occupation there, when there is an actual attacks, violence, and people on both sides are dying, we gotta stop that. And the way to do it is through political action. You could use your vote, lobbying, whatever. That's very important, and protest as well when it's civil.
Awesome, thank you. So we are getting to the end. I do just want to ask you really quickly as well. I'm going to put a link in the chat of a podcast that Khalil was recently on, because I think it gets to some of the things that we didn't get to answer today. I would also encourage folks to give him a follow on social media, because there's a lot of stuff that he's writing about that I think is a really interesting perspective that we're not often seeing in social media spaces. But I want to use these last couple minutes to actually ask you if you can talk a little bit more, still staying kind of in our diaspora world, when you talk about the organization that you founded, Agora Initiative. I think it's really interesting that you've also co-founded it with an Israeli academic. I'm curious if you can kind of tease out for us what it is that you're trying to do, how we're failing at doing it, kind of to the question that we were just talking about, how we're failing at doing it and how you guys see yourselves doing it. And that'll be kind of our question to end today's session.
Sure, yeah. So the idea started with me being very passionate about democratization in the Middle East. That's something that I always was passionate about. It was my research in grad school, and I'm really interested in the question of democratization, etc. I'm also interested in Israel and Palestine, how we come up to a solution about Israel and Palestine. And I met Elazar, and he was thinking a lot about the question about what do we do in Israel and Palestine? How do we get out of what we are? And we thought that one of the missing parts is we talk a lot about, peace and talking to each other, but we don't talk about the principles of constitutionalism, democracy, etc. So we came together with this with this organization, where I had to convince Elazar to not make it only about Israel and Palestine, but the broader region. He was more convinced about Israel and Palestine, but we came to a compromise. And the compromise is, although the center is Israel and Palestine, in the sense that we believe we have to be pushing to a solution to Israel and Palestine, I do believe, and I'm convinced, that a solution for Israel and Palestine that is based on constitutionalism and democracy will be the opening for a wave of democratization in the Middle East. I sincerely believe that one of the biggest obstacle to, I would like to rephrase it, let's not say the biggest obstacle, one of the obstacles for democratization in the region is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in other countries, because the movements that would emerge that are more radical and anti-democratic feel the grievances in Israel and Palestine. The dictators in the region also co-opt and use the Palestinian-Israeli conflict to rule. I mean, you can go all the way to Saddam, to today Sisi and other government in the region. So we do believe that constitutional democracy can lead to that. What do we do right now? Actually, we started in the West, so we're not really working a lot in Israel and Palestine, although that's the goal in the future. So now we're just because we just started, what we're doing is we go around and we speak, we tell about our stories, how we come to this conclusion, how a former IDF soldier, who is Elazar, and myself, came to be friends and came to believe in these ideas that we believe in. But the goal is to bring about more policy analysis in the future, writing about these issues, and also all sort of advocacy and community and groups buildings in the West here, and then transfer it to Israel and Palestine as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Right on the hour. Amazing. We got into, I think what you're talking about with Agora is exactly what we kind of strive to bring here at JSpace, which is that we talked about a lot of stuff today that's obviously very heavy, very difficult. This is obviously not a happy time. There's a lot of suffering on all sides, but we do have to be practical and look for a just outcome. And I think that the way to do it is exactly what we've talked about here today. And even you joining us here is exactly what it is, which is hearing from different voices, hearing from voices, on different sides of the political spectrum, and actually listening to one another, and then using it to actually take action and make some political change. So with that, I do want to thank everyone so much for joining us today. And I want to thank Khalil again for his time, his knowledge, his expertise, especially during this time. And I do just want to say really quickly, JSpace Canada, we are all volunteer. We're an all volunteer organization. It is within our mandate and mission to bring you these conversations, and we think they are so important, especially now. So if you could support us in this work, even a donation of $5, $10, $18. It goes an incredibly long way to be able to bring you these topics, voices, and ideas. We're going to send out an email with this recording afterwards for anyone who wants to watch it again or share it with their friends, and we'll include some links. I did also include in the chat a link to the podcast that I mentioned, as well as Khalil's Twitter. So if you have questions that you did not get to ask him, you can go harass him on social media. Khalil, thank you so much. Everyone have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mital. Thanks all for coming.
Bye.